Hey, this is Enaa, in with you in the fight back. Today I'm doing another FAQ, and I got asked a question by someone who says, I'm in favor of a classless society, but does it really need to be stateless? Well, let's get started. Under capitalism and pretty much all class societies, the state exists to enforce the decisions of the class that controls the government. In capitalist society, the state enforces the decisions of the capitalist class. Those decisions are designed to maintain the capitalist system in which the working class must labor in the service of the owners of the means of production. Now that's pretty clear, and under feudalism it existed to maintain those relations, under slavery, and so on and so forth. Well, come the revolution, and I would hope, is the state that exists under capitalism exists to maintain capitalism, which means its army, its police, its jails, its various institutions, its intelligence services, you name it. They're needed for that system. So we can't just grab hold of the capitalist state and use it for socialist or communist ends, because it's not designed for that. We need to abolish it and establish our own state. And this can be the example, say, of the Paris Commune, early Russian Soviets, workers' councils, whether they exist in Spain or elsewhere, where pretty much the standing army is replaced by a militia, and where the executive and legislative branches are fused, and where parliamentary deputies just receive the same pay as a skilled worker and are subject to recall. And it's pretty much an example of direct democracy, and this is a state in the process of withering away. But this has come the morrow of the revolution, essentially. What happens as we advance towards communism? And I hope you'll forgive me, because I want to really take this question seriously, but I'm going to look at the question of the state in the longer transition process. In a certain sense, the state is a necessary evil right after the revolution. There's capitalist encirclement. There's questions of whether for a Maoist, between the contradictions of socialism, between the capitalist road and the socialist road, or for Trotsky, it's between bourgeois distribution and social ownership. But can the state be a state of all the people? Well, I would argue no. In fact, the state, ultimately, I believe all communists would agree with the anarchists, we need to get rid of the state. When the revolution occurs and a socialist or communist society is being built, the modes of distribution are each according to his labor, which is an unequal mode of distribution. And this is a defect of early socialism, of its lower stage. And if you'll excuse me, I'm just going to look at the state in the larger question of defects. We inherit the state. We're going to still have it initially under socialism. We can't build communism on defects. We can't build it by increasing inequalities, by the perpetuation of the state. Why? Ultimately, as communism develops, you need to increase production, you need more abundance, so everyone can eventually have to each according to his needs, as opposed to each according to his abilities. And we need to proceed to a society of equality, solidarity, and too often Marx's critique of the Gotha program, or the phrase to each according to his labor, is used to justify the perpetuation of a certain mode of certain inequality. And we saw this in Stalinist Russia and other places. Rather, the idea of communism is to get past that, the defects, the inequality, the state machine. And capitalism ultimately has its own mode of regulation, the market forces, the pursuit of wealth and profit. And we can't build communism on this, of course. So an idea of market socialism is pretty much an oxymoron. We need to struggle against these defects. Otherwise, if the defects of inequality, the state, we will strengthen the old society and eventually it'll come back. So, communism must ensure a certain compatibility or behavior of those producers with the requirements of society. This must be done consciously by the producers themselves, not, for instance, in the spontaneous and the brutal methods of capitalism. For instance, extra legal force to force people to work, initially under capitalism, separating farmers from their land to force them to become laborers, or starvation. If you don't work for a capitalist, you're going to starve. Communism, we need to create our new productive forces, new human capabilities through praxis. And this means, essentially, it's a conscious effort. We need self-management and self-government. The people are in command of the transition themselves. What do I mean by that? Let's assume for a moment we do have world communism. Let's just assume that. So there's no danger of capitalist encirclement. Self-management, it's a discipline. It's almost a discipline from within. You decide. You're working together with others to manage yourself. You don't need a coercive force of the state, because the state, in commanding from above, is pretty much telling you what to do. And the state, of course, fosters these bourgeois, these commandist methods, and they're really incompatible with a democratic socialist framework. Because even in the best of intentions, the state, it's still a coercive force. So we need to get past that. Self-management, self-government, and the people are in command of this transition. Communism also needs its own rationality, not the rationality of the market, of the individual in pursuit of his wealth. We need a production that focuses on community, a mode of self-management that focuses on community and its needs. And we, of course, need a battle of ideas of solidarity, equality. And this means, of course, acting consciously. The producers themselves acting consciously. If you look at the Paris Commune or early Soviets, the producers, the workers themselves, are acting consciously. They're not being commanded by some all-powerful totalitarian state machine or whatnot to do what they have to do. And they're active, and in acting consciously for the satisfaction of all needs, this is producing a new rationality. Instead of the need for money for the pursuit of, again, acquisition of wealth for themselves, the market rationality, which is, it's like looking at people in isolation as atoms. They don't care for the wider community in that. The distribution according to labor, again, is a holdover from the market, from capitalism. It's bourgeois right. It generates inequality. And of course, in a system of inequality, you're going to need some form of a state to enforce, ultimately, the prevailing mode of production of this inequality. So if something gets out of line, you need the police or something. But, and this will endanger solidarity, and there's a tendency of rolling back communism and going back to capitalism. So, if on the other hand, though, we have common ownership of the means of production, and we have private ownership of labor power. So, as communism emerges, we see a state that, again, a commune-type state, or rather direct democracy. But we have, say, common ownership of the means of production, but you still own your labor power. You can still sell it, and you still get an unequal wage because maybe you have more family to support, you're more skilled or whatnot. And of course, with common ownership, you have the road to communism, and with private ownership of your labor power and the inequalities it generates, you have the road back to capitalism. So building communism, of course, it's not an irreversible process. We know that societies that have tried have often gone back, whether it's the Soviet Union or China. We need to create a new structure, not necessarily a state, that transforms circumstances and producers through self-management, self-government. It's what Esteban Mazares would call coordinated societal self-management. with new ideas and a new mode of regulation. And it's coming from the conscious actions of the producers themselves working in a communal interest. And with this, you really don't need a state. You don't need a coercive force. And of course, this type of social rationality is going to, again, it'll engender democratic discussion, but you don't need that state force. The forces of the state, like its army, its jails, and whatnot, they're designed to maintain a certain system. The idea of moving towards a system of self-management beyond the state, where the state is gone, which is withered away, is we need to, those functions of the state need to go back to society, self-management, where the population themselves are making these decisions in a communal interest. Again, and this is not a short-term process. This is a long-term process. Because on the morrow of the revolution, you can look at many examples, Russia, Spain, China, wherever. You're going to be encircled by hostile capitalist forces, and if at best the state is a necessary evil in that, you'll need some way to defend yourselves. But assuming we have world communism, the idea should be to take those functions of the state, these defects that the state has under capitalism, along with the wider society. I'm trying to look at this in a larger totality, and take those functions of the state under capitalism and old forces of class domination, and bring them back to the producers themselves, so that they're working in a self-management position. Because if you have the state, and the state's deciding, it's usurping a lot of these self-management functions, these democratic functions, and it's perpetuating the old division of labor, the inequalities of capitalism, and that will lead you back to capitalism. You want to get away from the state, away from the rationality of inequality and market forces, and back on a communist road to where the free condition of each is the condition for the free development of all, where we can create rich individuals in their social needs and in their world outlook. Not a short-term solution, but I hope I've answered your question. This is Enaa. Until next time.